Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Adrian is off. Tonight, the finance minister reveals he forgot to reimburse the We organization $40,000.
I want to apologize for this error on my part.
You didn't know about a $41,000 expense? How is that even possible?
And now, in a surprise move, the Prime Minister has agreed to take the hot seat.
Mr. Prime Minister, is the Governor General bullied?
Calls for action after a CBC investigation into bullying and harassment by the Governor General. Not exactly physical distancing.
Don't go against all the hard work that this province has put in.
As COVID cases climb, BC has new rules for bars and restaurants. And COVID concerns in the classroom.
How does hand sanitizer stop an airborne virus? Not having mandatory masks in a classroom.
How to get back to school safely. This is The National. A surprise admission today in the growing We organization controversy. Finance Minister Bill Morneau was set to testify today about family ties to We when he began by telling MPs that he, his wife, and his daughter had traveled abroad at We's expense and that he just today reimbursed some of that money. The government was already under fire for choosing We to administer a costly federal program. And after MPs were done grilling Morneau, the Prime Minister's office made an extraordinary announcement. Justin Trudeau will himself testify before the committee next week. That is something Prime Ministers almost never do. Evan Dyer breaks it all down for us.
Prime Minister Trudeau.
Why did you make a decision to testify at the Finance Committee?
The
Prime Minister wasn't talking, but one likely reason was Bill Morneau's unexpected admission that the We organization paid for 2 Morneau family trips in 2017, one to Kenya, another with his wife and children to Ecuador. Morneau said he'd paid $52,000 to cover flights and other costs of those trips, but he couldn't find receipts for expenses related to We activities.
This was to my surprise. Yesterday, I asked my assistant to reach out to the We organization regarding these trips and for them to provide me with the amount of total expenses incurred. Today, I wrote a check in payment of $41,366.
Canadians will find it impossible to believe that this organization showered you with $41,000 worth of luxury and accommodations, and that you didn't know about it.
We paid for your travel. That has the apparent perception of attempting to buy political influence.
It's completely unacceptable for a finance minister, for any minister, to accept illegal trips, which is what Mr. Morneau seems to have done, and only paid the money back on the day that he was scheduled to testify. So we believe it's time for Bill Morneau to resign.
In his defense, Morneau also testified that his family donated $100,000 to We, half in 2018 and half just last month. It's not clear if that second donation was made before the current controversy started to gather steam. The subsidized family travel adds to a growing list of personal benefits that Trudeau and Morneau family members have received from the charity, including lucrative speaking fees, paid and unpaid jobs for the kids, and flights and hotels for the Prime Minister's wife. All questions the PM himself will now have to face, along with his Chief of Staff, when they both appear before the same committee. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Gatineau, Quebec.
Vashi Kapelos has been digging into this as host of Power and Politics. So Vashi, how significant or damaging were today's revelations?
Look, Andrew, it wasn't pretty for them. I'm thinking even specifically of what the finance minister said during his testimony. He did the accounting yesterday. He cut the check today. That really leaves just the morning to figure out how to handle it. And certainly from sources I've been speaking to, he and his colleagues spent the day figuring out exactly how they would handle it. But you could see it on his face during that testimony. You know, he was apologetic, but he seemed resigned to the idea that the criticism would come fast and furious, and that it did.
Okay, and so let's talk about the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff appearing before the committee. How might that swing the pendulum either way?
So a couple of things. First, this is extraordinary. In all my time covering politics, I have not seen the Prime Minister or his Chief of Staff testify before a committee full of MPs primed to criticize and critique and grill the Prime Minister. So it's going to be must-see TV. I've spoken to as many people around the Prime Minister as possible to figure out what the strategy might be behind it. And what they tell me is the idea is kind of to let the oxygen all out at once. A big event that puts it behind them. They really say they have nothing left to hide. There is nothing rather to hide. hide. And so that's their motivation. On the flip side, there is a big risk to all that. We saw it today with the finance minister, I should say. It can certainly backfire. They're gambling that it won't, but we're going to have to see if that's the case. It will keep this story going for a little while longer, that's for sure.
Okay, lots more to come. Thanks, Mashi. And we have a lot of reaction tonight to our exclusive report on an allegedly toxic atmosphere in the office of the Governor General, Julie Payette. More people have come forward detailing how they felt bullied and demeaned in one of the highest offices in Canada. Ashley Burke has the fallout.
Justin Trudeau isn't part of the problems at Rideau Hall, but the NDP says he must be part of the solution.
Will the Prime Minister show leadership and launch an independent investigation?
Obviously, every Canadian has the right to a safe, secure workspace free from harassment, and that is extremely important.
Extremely important, but Trudeau isn't saying what action, if any, he'll take. It all comes after CBC News reported more than a dozen sources accused the Governor General, Julie Payette, of berating, belittling, and publicly humiliating staff. Payette's secretary, Assunta De Lorenzo, is also accused of bullying employees.
Definitely Rideau Hall needs to look into this very, very carefully.
Today, a public silence from Rideau Hall, but a private memo was sent to all employees last night, just hours after CBC's report. De Lorenzo wrote, "I want you to know that I, along with the Governor General and the entire management team, am deeply committed to fostering a healthy work environment. We are here to listen and take action in order to keep improving our work environment."
Please rise.
She told staff to report any complaints, but sources say their issues would be dealt with by the very people they're complaining about. The Privy Council office said it's very concerned about the allegations and will be following up on these reports. A former cabinet minister says the government needs to take action now.
This is a minority parliament. This is not simply a symbolic office. This is a hugely important office that has to have the confidence of Canadians.
The Prime Minister could have a discussion behind closed doors with Payette to try and resolve this. Payette is the Queen's representative to Canada, and Buckingham Palace is aware of CBC's report, but says it's a matter for the Governor General's office to handle. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
For many companies around the world, the past few months have been a reckoning of sorts as they try to address anti-Black racism in their own offices and boardrooms. That includes the CBC as well. Tonight, a CBC News investigation takes us through another allegation of racist language being used at the corporation. Katie Nicholson spoke to a former employee about what was said and what happened when he spoke out.
Dexter Brown loves CBC.
I felt like home. It felt like I was giving back to Canada.
But Brown doesn't work here anymore. In April of 2019, he was at an all-staff meeting of the Fifth Estate. That's where they screened this documentary.
Half of them are Black.
There was no warning they were about to hear the N-word 12 times. The thrust of the doc? How harmful the word is.
But why that? You see?
Because that's what I heard growing up.
That's what I'm saying. So are we going to continue it?
No,
so we cutting that off right now?
Yes, sir.
In the discussion that followed, witnesses say host Gillian Findley and editor Loretta Hicks repeated the word. There were more than 30 people in the room, including new executive producer Catherine Legg and the head of investigative Marie Close. According to multiple witnesses, no one spoke up. Brown, a junior employee, was the lone Black person.
Because they should have known better. I feel like they should have known that that word has a lot of power and it affects people.
In an email, Findley says she doesn't remember using the word, but says, if, however, my memory is wrong and I did quote someone from the film using the word, I apologize. It should not have happened. Hicks declined comment. Legg did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Close said she is unable to speak because of confidentiality.
This is the last place you go and think that you are going to hear someone say that word.
Nadia Stewart, the head of the Canadian Association of Black Journalists, was one of the first people Brown called.
We know the CBC can do better, and in this instance, definitely should have done better.
Emails show Brown briefly spoke to Legg the next day, but there was no resolution and no apology from colleagues.
Yeah, an apology would have been great. It would have meant a lot to me.
Brown lodged a complaint asking to be moved off the show. He says he was offered other temporary positions, including one under the same manager, but he wasn't satisfied with the options and stayed put. CBC hired an external law firm to look into work culture at the Fifth Estate, including the use of the N-word. When the investigation was over, he wasn't allowed to see the report.
Well, I was hoping to get a bit more information about what happened and steps that would be taken to address the issue, to make sure that something like what happened there wouldn't happen again.
In a statement, CBC says the investigation was comprehensive and confirmed corrective actions were taken, but couldn't say what they were, citing confidentiality.
The Weekly starts now.
But since the incident, host Wendy Mesley used the word twice in editorial meetings.
To know that another journalist of color had to face something kind of similar to what I faced, that was really tough.
In recent weeks, CBC has announced a number of changes to tackle systemic racism and increase diversity. It's too late for Brown, who took a job at CTV, but he still hopes for positive change at the public broadcaster.
And I hope that, there are changes there, changes for the better, to make people of color feel welcome, accepted, appreciated.
Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
Turning now to COVID-19. Over recent days, Canada has seen a rise in cases across a number of hotspots and clusters. And taken together, they tell a clear story. By June, Canada's daily new cases were far below the peak and heading south until they hit a floor about 2 weeks ago. That's when they went back up. And this saddle shape is unmistakable. We are back where we were in early June and heading in the wrong direction. Driving the numbers regionally, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, which had its highest daily increase yet today. Now, that upward trend is also being felt in British Columbia, so much so that officials are moving to tighten restrictions for restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. As Briar Stewart shows us, it comes as frustration grows over large groups of people ignoring physical distancing.
A large sunset gathering, complete with dancing and drums, baffled some passing by last night.
Holy crap.
And it infuriated plenty of others.
Don't go against all the hard work that this province has put in just to have a hippie drum circle.
Ryan Schaap estimated the party swelled to over 100, much more than the province's ban on gatherings over 50 people.
The people are left to police themselves, and for the other side of the beach that's following the rules, it was fine, but for that small yet large group of people, they chose not to.
In BC, where there's been an uptick of COVID cases, 34 reported today, there's been an increase in the number of young adults testing positive.
But if you are in a crowded location, being outside is not enough. We know that it can be transmitted when you're having close conversations.
Today, the province also tightened rules for some businesses. Anyone going to a restaurant or bar must have a seat. No one can get a drink for themselves, and establishments have to ensure that people aren't crowded around. The group representing the province's restaurants wants to see one more change: all food service workers wearing masks.
I think there's a good visual cue, and it sort of shows that we are doing something, because there's a lot of consumer confidence stuff going in this.
How are you doing over here? You're good? Okay, good.
At this restaurant, all the staff wear masks. It's already implemented the province's new rules, but it can still be a challenge to keep groups small.
People are used to being at craft beer market, mixing, mingling, cheersing, all that, but we have to micromanage the heck out of those situations.
Because inside, restaurants can't seat any parties larger than 6. But outside, where there's little enforcement, it still comes down to good judgment. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, many of Saskatchewan's 60 new COVID cases are in communal living situations.
Almost all of the new cases are related to an ongoing outbreak in a number of Hutterite communities in southwest and west central Saskatchewan.
Health officials say 48 of the new cases are on colonies, and 43 of those are from a single colony, 200 kilometers west of Regina. The number of active cases has now climbed to 190, the most since mid-May. 7 out of the 8 new cases announced in Manitoba today were also in Hutterite communities. There are now 35 infections linked to colonies in the province, with most related to a large gathering in Alberta last month. Now, globally, COVID-19 cases hit a grim new milestone today. The number of confirmed infections exceeds 15 million worldwide, and the death toll continues to rise. More than 619,000 people have died from the virus. The overwhelming majority of those in Brazil and the United States, which we know is a big driver of those global numbers. Nearly 4 million cases there and 142,000 deaths. The American daily death toll had been falling, but now, for the first time since early June, more than 1,000 people died from COVID-19 in a single day. Now, for a second day in a row, Donald Trump took questions at the White House coronavirus briefing. But the pandemic didn't seem to be his biggest concern. The president also announced he would be sending more federal officers to major American cities. Salima Shivji looks at his latest law and order strategy.
Seattle's pledge to defund its police department.
A dark message of fear that Donald Trump knows will appeal to his base.
Joe Biden said he's absolutely on board with defunding the police.
A falsehood, painting his Democratic opponent as soft on crime.
I'm sorry that there is no one here to answer your emergency call.
This ad and two others are in regular rotation. The Trump campaign spending nearly $20 million in just 20 days to hammer the message home. All as protests get worse in Portland. Federal forces from several agencies, including Homeland Security, on the ground fueling tensions with protesters. The president today making good on a promise to send more agents to cities run by Democrats.
These same politicians have now embraced the far-left movement to break up our police departments, causing violent crime in their cities to spiral.
They'll go to Albuquerque and Chicago, which is struggling to contain a spike in gun violence, with Trump saying other cities could be next, despite local leaders furiously denouncing the move.
Nameless agents pulling people off the street, depriving them of their constitutional rights. That is not what a democracy looks like.
These scenes are also causing discomfort among some Republicans, like Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security under George W. Bush and a former governor of Pennsylvania.
The department was established to protect America from the ever-present threat of global terrorism. It was not established to be the president's personal militia.
But the sinking poll numbers the Trump campaign is trying to fix by leaning into a tough-on-crime message doesn't look like the right strategy when it's the rapid spread of the virus, not law and order, that's top of mind for many voters. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Washington.
Another favored Donald Trump target during an election, asylum seekers. But when they come to Canada from the U.S., they can be sent back under what's called the Safe Third Country Agreement. Now, a federal court says that practice is wrong and that the agreement leads to the violation of charter rights. As Farah Morales shows us, that ruling represents a seismic shift.
They are images that are hard to forget. Asylum seekers with luggage in tow, crossing from the U.S. into rural Quebec on foot. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, this is the only way they can seek asylum in Canada, because if they arrive at an official border crossing from the U.S., they'd be turned back and asked to seek asylum there. Today, a federal court judge ruled that violates their human rights.
This ruling is not only significant, it is groundbreaking.
Amnesty International Canada is one of the groups that was part of the court challenge.
This has been years now, really since day 2 after Donald Trump took office. Groups have been calling on the Canadian government to take this step.
I think people did see those images of kids in cages in the U.S., of families being separated in the U.S., and people don't realize that our immigration system is intimately tied up with the U.S. immigration system in many ways, and the agreement is one of those.
The federal court justice ruled the way the U.S. imprisons refugee claimants violates the Charter of Rights. Today, those who work to help refugees resettle are welcoming the decision.
When people are seeking safety, they're simply seeking safety. We're really happy to see this decision.
Today, the Minister of Public Safety stood by the agreement.
We were always mindful of our international convention obligations to those seeking refuge.
The Conservatives want the government to appeal today's ruling and to strengthen the agreement.
We have urged the Liberals for years now to negotiate with the United States repair and fixes for the loopholes in the Safe Third Country Agreement.
The federal government is now reviewing the decision and has 6 months to respond. Until then, the agreement remains in place. Farah Morali, CBC News, Toronto.
Alberta RCMP laid terrorism and kidnapping charges against a 34-year-old Calgary man. Hussein Barot is alleged to have traveled to Syria 6 years ago for ISIS training.
It's important that law enforcement send a message that there is no immunity for Canadians who go abroad to commit acts of terrorism.
He is scheduled to appear in court on Friday in Calgary. Police say the investigation is ongoing.
The overall goal of this operation is to bring it to a very peaceful resolution.
A search continues in Nova Scotia for a man accused of stabbing a police officer after allegedly assaulting his common-law spouse on Monday night. Police say they tried to apprehend Tobias Doucette yesterday, but he escaped. The injured officer is recovering in hospital.
We believe that on the morning of the 9th of July, sadly, all those sad events had already been played, and all three were already dead.
A difficult update from Quebec Provincial Police. They say Martin Carpentier killed his two daughters and then himself. Officials say it all happened within the first day after the three went missing 2 weeks ago. The investigation had triggered an Amber Alert and a widespread manhunt. Well, as many as 10% of people who contract the coronavirus can experience debilitating symptoms for months.
I'll start to cough again and my chest gets tight. I feel like, almost like there's cobwebs in there that I can't get a breath down past it.
Up next, the folks who call themselves COVID long haulers. Plus, Nova Scotia announces its back-to-school plans.
The best place for children is in the classroom.
But lots of parents, kids, and educators across the country are still waiting to find out what September holds for them. So, our doctors are here to talk about whether it's safe to go back, and if so, how we should do it. We're back in 2. Well, the Toronto Blue Jays won't be allowed to play home games in Pittsburgh because of the pandemic. It's the latest jurisdiction to say no. The federal government already denied a request for the team to play in Toronto. The Blue Jays manager says he is in negotiations with other teams. The season begins this week. Well, COVID-19 can be deadly. There's no question about that. But even with milder cases, as Christine Birak shows us, it appears the effects of the virus can last weeks, even months.
Nearly half of COVID-19 patients lying in intensive care units can expect longer-term complications, ranging from brain injuries to liver, heart, and lung damage. But it appears even those who don't become severely ill can have lingering symptoms.
My symptoms were very mild.
An active runner, Emily Beaudeschamps, thought she'd bounce back from the virus. But months later,
I'll start to cough again and my chest gets tight. Like just my upper chest will get tight and I feel like almost like there's cobwebs in there that I can't get a breath down past it.
A COVID symptom study app tracking 4 million patients in the UK shows while most people recover from the infection within 2 weeks, 1 in 10 may still have symptoms after 3 weeks, and some may suffer for months.
They're being called the COVID long haulers. What we're hearing is that this is a group of patients who didn't necessarily have as severe an initial infections.
Various symptoms include stomach aches, breathlessness, brain fog, and persistent fatigue.
One of the theories out there is this is what we call an autoimmune phenomenon.
Doctors say it's possible that after the infection clears, antibodies and other immune cells that killed the virus can start attacking the patient's own system. Autoimmune responses can also be triggered by other viruses, including Epstein-Barr and herpes. But recurring fatigue was also seen in some patients who recovered from SARS. Some are now asking whether this virus does the same.
This is too early. We really need data and not just anecdotal stories.
Scientists at Toronto General are now recruiting participants for a large study examining long-term outcomes from COVID-19.
We are really using specialized tools in precision medicine to try to understand why COVID-19 affects different people differently.
Beaudeschamps never imagined she wouldn't be back at work full-time yet. Another reminder of just how unpredictable this virus can be. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, next on The National, some clarity for some students about September.
We have secured masks, hand sanitizers, and other personal protective equipment.
Nova Scotia promises to return to full in-class learning in the fall. In Alberta, a plan, but some teachers are concerned.
Not having mandatory masks in the classroom is just going to lead to eventually rises in COVID cases.
And with just weeks to go in some provinces, no clear plan at all. So we know you've still got questions about kids and COVID. Our doctors are standing by to talk safety in schools. All that starts right after this.
I'm fully confident that as the plan we have in place allows us to have children back in school, the optimum place for their learning, while we have appropriate COVID safety measures in place.
Well, there you have it. Nova Scotia has announced that students will be back in class in person in the fall. But back to school won't exactly be back to normal. There will be some big changes, including mandatory masks on buses and in high school hallways, and an end to big gatherings like assemblies, all measures to reduce risk. Now, of course, the risk isn't zero, but Nova Scotia has just one known active COVID-19 case right now. Alberta, on the other side of the country, is detecting dozens of new cases a day. And as Rafi Boudjikanian shows us, its school reopening plan has some cheering and others voicing serious concerns.
Willow and Reed Stamba are having fun.
Reed is the big flipper.
But their father says, don't be fooled. The ups and downs of the pandemic have hit hard.
I'm off work and the kids were really kind of upset about being off school.
They're eager for some sense of normalcy this fall.
It is going to make life easier for everybody, for parents with work and for kids, going back to school.
Alberta sending all 750,000 of its public students back to class in September, urging physical distancing, staggering lunch breaks, increasing cleaning. But it won't be imposing limits on class sizes or require wearing masks. And it won't give schools new money to implement safety measures.
Not having mandatory masks in the classroom, making it an option, is just going to lead to eventually rises in COVID cases.
Alberta now has more than 1,200 active cases, the highest it's seen in more than 2 months.
If there's a local outbreak of significant spike in new active cases in a particular community, the principal, superintendent, and school board will consult with Alberta Health Services.
The province insists there are contingencies in place and says removing all risk is impossible.
Pretending that it's normal is not probably going to work.
Understandable, says this education professor, but it's also crucial to address the concerns of students, teachers, and parents.
I do think that it would be naive to assume that we're all going to go back to school and it's just going to be just fine.
Back at the Stambas,
we already do almost as much as we can. We do wear masks in indoor public spaces.
The hope is other families will be just as cautious as Alberta's near-normal school plan becomes their new normal. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
Okay, when we come back, what the experts say about making sure schools are safe. Our doctors are standing by to take us through what you should expect from your child's school. Welcome back. We have been talking about back to school in September, and we've heard about Nova Scotia's and Alberta's plans to return to near normal, with virtually all students back in classrooms, of course, with new safety measures to go along with that. But Ontario is considering a more hybridized approach where different students would return at different times. But it all comes down to the same questions. How safe is it for kids to go back, and what can be done to make it safer? Well, joining me now, Dr. Alon Vaisman, an infectious diseases physician, and respirologist Dr. Samir Gupta. And doctors, let me start just by quoting Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. So he says, the evidence is overwhelming that schools can be operated safely with little health risk for children and teachers and low risk of causing serious outbreaks in the communities that surround them. So let's take that bit by bit. Dr. Gupta, how susceptible are kids to catching COVID-19, and how do they do when they do catch it?
Yeah, so the susceptibility question is a good one. We have some information on that. There was actually a review done by a group in the UK recently, and they reviewed a bunch of contact tracing studies and sort of screening studies. And what they found was that children have just about half the odds of contracting the virus from a close contact compared to adults. So they do seem to be less susceptible to actually catching the virus. The flip side of that is when you look at symptoms, and we've talked about younger people having less severe disease, kids, if they do catch it, are less likely to be symptomatic. Up to 80% of kids, in fact, might have asymptomatic infection. But the problem with that is that we also have data to suggest that if they do catch it, although they may be as asymptomatic, they have a similar viral load to adults. In other words, they carry around a similar amount of virus as adults do, which implies that they're probably just as infectious as adults.
Right, and I guess that's the tricky part, right? When you combine those two things, the question of whether they are as infectious compared with the fact that they have that sort of heightened viral load for maybe what you might expect. Dr. Vaisman, what more do we know about the potential risk there for younger people to kind of be vectors for the disease? Maybe the greater threat is getting other people sick.
Yes, exactly. So in the group of recent studies looking at other groups of young people, including ages 10 to 19, might have as good a capacity of transmitting the virus as adults do. So the concern there being that if you return to school, especially high schools, the young people, as was mentioned, are not going to have as poor outcomes, not going to do as poorly with the virus, but they do have the capacity to acquire the virus and potentially transmit it to people who they're living with at home, including adults, including their grandparents, including those who are more vulnerable and might themselves have poorer outcomes with it.
Okay, so then Dr. Vaisman, let me just ask you the simple question straight up. Is it safe for kids to go back to school in September?
I think we've learned from a lot of examples across the world in situations where it potentially might be safe for people to go back to school with certain measures in place to try to reduce the likelihood of transmission. We've heard a lot of experience from a lot of places around the world where they've done this safely, where we've a lot of lessons learned about when to pull back, when to open up. And I think in Canada, that same thing can be done safely.
Dr. Vaisman, what are some of those measures that you would expect every school to take? I mean, it's easy to think of the obvious ones, good hand hygiene, let's keep the desks apart. What else beyond that?
Yeah, so the hand hygiene, social distancing is important. Screening for symptoms when people arrive at school, including the teachers and the students, educating parents about symptoms, making sure that there is masks available for students who are able to wear them so that they reduce the likelihood of transmission as well. Also having a backup plan to be able to transition smoothly between in-class teaching to classes outside of class is also an important step also to try to be able to do this very safely and effectively.
Dr. Gupta, let me put one of those measures to you. Dr. Vaisman mentioned making masks available. What about going one step further, making masks mandatory?
You know, I think the trickiest environment is that classroom where people are going to be together, probably not able to physically distance the appropriate distance, and they'll be for a prolonged period of time in a poorly ventilated space. That's the space where ideally we would want masks. I'll tell you that, you know, after a long day, I have trouble keeping a mask on without touching it and sort of contaminating myself, and that's part of my job. I think that although we would want it, for most children, it will be practically impossible. I think it's a very challenging thing and very difficult to mandate because of that.
And does that risk of I mean, just being sloppy with the handling of the mask, does that really outweigh the benefit of wearing the mask and potentially sort of blocking transmission of the virus that way?
Hard to know. You know, we do worry, you know, if you're wearing a mask all day, you know, partly it's to protect others from your own droplets, but also partly there's some protection for yourself. And if there is an infected party in that environment, there may well be virus on the surface of the mask if you've been breathing through it all day. So touching it frequently, and particularly taking it on and off, will take away from the benefit. And touching it frequently if it's infected can actually be deleterious. So that is the concern.
Excellent to hear from you both. Dr. Vaisman, Dr. Gupta, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next on The National, when getting back to normal means everything.
The first day I dropped Emily off, and I said to my husband, like, I just feel like I can breathe.
Next, how the reopening of programs for people living with disabilities can make all the difference. We've been talking about what a safe return to school could look like, with parents and children longing for a return to normal. But the toll of isolation can be even greater for those with disabilities. That's why 2 specialized programs are choosing to reopen, giving many families their first real break since the start of the pandemic. Joanna Remiliotis shows us.
Rett syndrome is a genetic neurological disease that Emily was diagnosed with just before she was 2. Means that her body doesn't do what she wants it to do or what it should do. So basically her body doesn't work.
Have fun at camp. We'll see you tonight. Be good.
Life isn't easy for 6-year-old Emily Higgins, but there are bright spots, and they're heading to one.
Let's go, kiddo.
The camp Emily is going to is nearly an hour away.
Oh my gosh, Emily.
You are gonna have such a good day.
But it's a lifeline.
Yeah.
Now more than ever.
You do love camp, huh?
Even the first day I dropped Emily off, and I said to my husband, like, I just feel like I can breathe now, because it was really hard. So, yeah, so it's better now because she's happy.
Very big smiles this morning.
It wasn't an easy decision. Emily's condition means she has trouble fighting infection. But it was a trade-off between managing the risk and the emotional toll staying home had already taken.
She was missing her friends, and through this, she was also diagnosed with dystonia, which is basically really painful muscle spasms.
Good morning.
We'd seen it through the year, but all the things that were happening compounded it. So Emily would just cry all day. And so we would cry. It really was just survival mode.
Okay, are you ready for an awesome day, my girl?
That desperate need for a reprieve. It's why Kayla's Children's Center was determined to open. With precautions like temperature checks and bubbling groups of children and staff members. It's the only camp in the Toronto area for disabled and medically fragile children. The first respite parents have had in months.
We had a lot of parents drive up and drop their kid off and then literally sit in their car and sob. Everything they've gone through over the last 4 months just hit them.
Yaffe Scheinberg runs the camp.
This year, these parents were they're at their breaking point.
Good morning.
And you have to understand that they don't have an option of saying, I'm just gonna take an off day, a mental health day today, and I'm just not gonna, do all the bathing and the feeding and the stuff that their kids need. And I feel like by the end of June, they were at the end of their rope.
Have a good day. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
We have to watch her all the time, and you're constantly at the edge.
Oh, 6 feet! Oh, the 6 feet!
It's unrelenting is a good word because we don't have the break, or he's taking her to a program. But like everything else with these special needs, you don't have a choice. You just do it.
Have a good time at home.
Love you. Have a great time.
Rena and Gary Cogan's daughter Tanya is 42 years old. Tanya has cerebral palsy and is developmentally delayed. She's been home for the last 4 months.
Mom!
And just started coming back here.
There we go.
Okay, let's do this.
Danny is a day program for adults with disabilities. It looks different now, but they're together again.
So how are you feeling today?
Feel great. Feel again. See my friend again.
It's why co-founder Kathy Laszlo made the call to reopen.
Some participants are nonverbal, and you would think that, what does it matter, right? So he sits here or he sits at home, so what's the difference, right? He's just sitting. It's not true. You can see the happiness on his face just to be here with his friends. They just need this. They really do.
Coming back meant scaling back. Groups of 5 are cohorted in half days, and staff get tested for COVID every 2 weeks. And everything is cleaned several times a day. It took a lot of time and money to put in all the safety measures, but Kathy says it's worth it.
Seeing the joy on their face worth everything we had to do.
Yeah.
They all very happy, even if they're not able to so much demonstrate, they are very happy. But when they are actually can demonstrate their happiness, it gives us joy too.
Holy smoke, look at them all.
Yeah.
For Rena and Gary, it's a chance to drop their guard for a few hours, to enjoy their garden and each other.
You're doing good.
Yeah, very well.
Often, you know, we're tense, like even your body is constantly tense, and you just sort of relax because we know she's in good hands where she is.
And however lovely the break, it always comes back to one thing.
But she's happy.
That's what every parent wants, right?
Yep. Yep. When she's happy, we're satisfied.
Where are we going?
Happiness can be fleeting. The goal here, to keep recapturing it. Emily understands everything and uses a device to communicate. She tells us she's had enough of the sun and of us.
Goodbye.
Tears here do dry more quickly. There are so many distractions. And Emily's mom is grateful for everyone.
We've just seen Emily back to herself, happy, feeling good. She has more patience, but there's been a huge difference in all of us. You know, I'm not crying every day. You know, I always say when Emily's happy, I'm happy. So we're all in a really, in a much better place.
I am. I love you. Oh, you gotta get this one thing.
And it's all they all need to simply catch their breath.
Have a good day. I love you.
Come on in. One of your favorite activities ever.
Joanna Brumiliotis, CBC News, Thornhill, Ontario.
Okay, next on The National, a story that plays out exactly as you would expect it to. A bunch of young people start a lemonade stand and raise $35,000.
Hi, my name's Aditi, and we are the Lemonade Lovers.
The Ontario kids behind a 4-year-long fundraising campaign, and they're not done yet. Right after this. This group of kids call themselves the Lemonade Lovers. Their goal, pretty straightforward, sell some lemonade and raise some money. Their fundraising campaign has been going strong for 4 years, and this year, even COVID-19 could not stop them. It's our moment.
Hi, we're the Lemonade Lovers.
We have been fundraising and donating money for the past 4 years.
All the money goes to Sick Kids Hospital.
So Lemonade Lovers is our tiny little organization in which we fundraise and donate money to sick kids. We thought that since we're doing something, why don't we use this for a good reason? And so we thought, why not fundraise, and everything we get, we can donate it to sick kids. In our first lemonade stand, we collected $600, and all together in the past 4 years, we've collected over $35,000 and donated it all. And when we went there, we actually saw the wall on the side that they have. And if you raise $50,000, your name goes on the wall. So that was even more motivation for us. We're like, we need to get that money and we need to get our name on that wall. Due to COVID-19, we can't actually have an actual lemonade stand, but we are definitely moving on to the virtual aspect of it. We have some dance videos, we have some green screen voiceover videos. We're trying to make sure that our message gets out and more people donate.
So hey, they're doing good work. They're hoping to raise thousands of dollars this year if they can. And at this point, you may be wondering, wait a second, how on earth did they raise $35,000 with just a lemonade stand? Because wouldn't you have to sell like 8 trillion glasses of lemonade? They have managed to parlay this simple lemonade stand over the years into an actual event. They have donors, they have sponsors, and yeah, pretty ambitious. That's The National for this Wednesday, July 22nd. Good night.